Let me hit car. I got it now. White privilege.
Yeah, what does Mr. E drive?
Yeah.
What does Mr. E?
He drives a big red F-150.
What's that?
He drives a big red F-150.
Red Ford F-150.
Yeah.
I don't know, I never see the parking lot.
Well, you're gonna remember.
Oh my god, what the heck? You're weird.
We are good back there?
You're straight, buddy.
Okay, so if you guys will just do your best to ignore the dumb camera over there.
I'm gonna wink
roll
at
like
it.
how we normally would roll, right? We'll just do that.
You ever seen The
I'm
Office?
actually gonna flip the lights so we can see these a little bit better. Is that all right?
Yeah, you're
Okay, cool.
This is a good camera. We'll pick it up.
Jordan,
Okay.
if you answer.
I'm actually pumped that Martin is in here because there could be something. There's things that are involved in this that
Like Brittany.
will be fun. So this is where I want to start. I'm going to sort of bring it back to when we started. When was that? October, right? When we started in October, a couple of fundamental ideas to get us kicked off on our next chunk of stuff that we're going to be doing. I'm going to start with just this question for you guys. What makes a living thing alive? Right? So we've discussed this. I know you've discussed it in the past about a living thing. What are the actual things and characteristics that make something alive or living? So I'm going to give you, I think a minute is fair, just real quick. What's in your head right now? Discuss that back and forth with your group, and then let's share that out. Okay?
Wait, guys, let's think about something.
Think about it like plants and animals and humans, like they all, like things are being carried out within their bodies.
Yeah, it's
But
processing.
you never think,
As long
like nothing is moving.
has to either perform cellular respiration process to keep things
What's keeping?
Or no, keep
Yeah, processing energy.
the thing that don't get sun, like the
Oh.
How's the process energy? But it can't be like
Yeah, but like you would never like pick a flower. Yeah, because fire isn't.
but it's still processing it.
fire is just the excitation of molecules that all create bacteria.
Well, what really is alive? Technically, everything that makes up our body is not alive.
Yeah.
But somehow we're alive.
Our heart.
Yeah, but atoms are not alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, atoms themselves are
Okay, here we go.
what's alive. They make up
I heard good stuff. Let's start. I'm going to start back here with Jack. Jack, first idea.
Anything that really has like metabolic reactions or chemical reactions in the body.
Metabolic, catabolic reactions, right? So we're ripping things down in order to harness a little bit of energy. You guys agree with that? I would say so, right? That's a good place to start. Any other ideas? Is it just about energy? Yeah, go ahead.
The
First.
ability to reproduce,
Ability to reproduce. Why would that be valuable?
so that they can keep making more of their species, so it's just not one animal and then it disappears.
You want to keep making the same species, really, and what do you pass along when you do that? Go ahead, Rich.
Oh, I have another one.
Yeah, go ahead. You just
Oh, I
rapid
was
fire.
gonna say a form of like movement.
A form of movement. Okay, let's think about that one. Are there things that you guys would consider alive that are not animated or do not necessarily move? And I guess the question would be, well, what does move mean then, right? What are some things that maybe
Well,
don't move?
I would think if you're thinking of like a flower or something, like yeah, like it doesn't physically move, but it like there are parts of it that move
Okay.
and like transfer.
Yeah. Have you guys ever seen a plant that's next to a light source and what they tend to do? They sort of bend towards it, right? So could we consider that movement? Yeah, I would say so. And that's a plant, right? Other ideas? Yeah.
Has some DNA.
Why is that important, Brian? I think that sort of goes along with what Bryce was saying over here. So
Yeah.
DNA, reproduction, those two seem inherently linked, right? So tell me more.
Well, in order for you, the reason you reproduce is to pass on your DNA. So, I guess
Well, what does DNA do? No, that's
It makes you.
it makes it.
how.
Blueprint.
I know it's a blueprint. Like we hear it's a blueprint. That's like a popular thing. When you guys think of DNA, what do you think of? When I say DNA, what do you even think of? Yeah, like maybe like meiosis or maybe a double helix.
Okay.
Cool, okay. Thanks, sir. Okay, yeah, so when I think of DNA, I'm thinking something along with bits of information that are being passed along, right? Any other remaining sort of ideas of what you think something has to have? Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
I said that it has to either
respire or you go through photosynthesis. So, solar respiration.
Yeah, and those two things, photosynthesis, cell respiration, are really just strategies to do what? Process energy, right? So sort of along with, I've jacked up with you about energy, right? Ready for a quiz?
Yes. So right.
Alive or not alive?
Not alive.
I want to know why though.
Definitely.
Because it's a rock.
And does it carry out any of the process?
Let's go. So yeah, it doesn't carry out processing, right? It doesn't do any of that stuff. Does this thing process energy?
No. Well, I mean, technically, you like throw it at someone.
You pick it up and you throw it.
It's not
It has
absorbing.
potential energy when
But
it's
it's,
in hand.
go ahead,
It's
go ahead.
not absorbing anything and like, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not, yeah.
Is it chemically doing anything inside of its body or form?
It's not making.
No, and it's not making anything. Okay, what about this?
Depends if it's still
Yeah, it
attached to the
depends.
tree.
No, so let's just say these are some twigs that I gathered outside. And here they are. Pretend that I'm holding them in front of you. What do you say?
Not alive.
They were once alive.
I don't know.
Dead, once alive? Is that a difference? Is that a distinct difference? Does that difference matter for something that's alive or not alive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, explain. So Brian, go ahead. You seem pretty sure.
Well, I just remember that from like that video that we watched. I can't remember when, but it's if anything that was categorized as alive and then dies, it is considered alive because it was once alive.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Also, aren't things still like going on chemically within it? Because like if a person dies, then like doesn't the tissue and stuff start to break down? Isn't that still? Yes.
Yeah, that process of
Going on.
decomposition is something, right? And that's sort of interaction with its environment around it, right? Yeah. Go ahead. Well.
Because like, once they die, they kind of become an abiotic feature because they're not doing work themselves anymore. They're just, they have nutrients that can be broken down for other things, but they themselves are not doing work.
Okay. Give me a poll then. Alive. Raise your hand. It's okay. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, honestly. Go ahead, Tom.
I don't know. I'm still kind of assuming if alive and then once alive is like a separate category than alive, but I don't think saying like it's dead is completely correct because
Okay.
it was once alive.
So once alive, different from not alive?
Yes.
Yeah? We agree on that? Okay, so once alive, is that how you guys would categorize it?
Yeah.
Okay, you're just adding a new category, I'm fine with that. What about like the, hang on, before I move on from this, what about like the door?
I would say that was.
Isn't the door made out of wood?
But isn't it the same thing as a twig then?
Kind of the same thing as a twig. So would you call a door a thing that was once alive?
Like I think it was once alive, but it's gone through a lot of processes to make it a door.
Yeah, but if you're like cremated, like you're still once alive, but it's gone through a process.
But it's a door. But it's a door.
Our definition is but it's a door. We know doors aren't alive.
It was alive.
Okay, but I bet you it's made out of plant
The
cells.
wood was.
Oh, yeah.
But those plant cells are no longer functioning, and the door is not doing photosynthesis.
Okay.
So he said that those twigs are once alive.
So then the twigs
I think it's once
once alive.
So something was interesting about it's not doing its processes anymore. It's not no longer carrying out energy. It no longer is using that strategy. It no longer can reproduce. That probably matters, whether or not we consider something alive or not, right? But you could, I think we could. Could you not just call that a preserved thing that we now have a function for that was once alive?
Yeah.
It's kind of what it is.
Well, isn't that kind of like when
I would think.
people
Dead
use like
ones alive.
dead people?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. What about that? Okay, but what's the difference?
It's a fish.
Well, this is fish. Good job. Yeah. Okay, is it doing all those things that we said it has to do though? Minus the part of showing you it reproducing. Right, yeah, it's not reproducing. What about this? What about these?
That's a lot.
What are they?
Bacteria.
Okay, so they're bacteria. So size really probably doesn't necessarily matter, right? Like it doesn't matter how large the bacteria or the organism are compared to other things. What about this one? This one confuses my freshmen. They don't know. They really honestly do not know. It might be confusing to some of you. What do you think? Okay, why?
It's just not reproducing.
But if
It's
I
just
just
a
if I took like a match and I had a candle over here and I just lit the candle.
Yeah, but it doesn't have like DNA.
It's a reaction, it's not
Yeah.
a live thing.
I agree, so it is a reaction, yep.
It's just heat exciting the molecules in the air around it, that's all fire is.
That's pretty much it, right? It's just a chemical reaction. So we said chemical reactions was an important part of this, but what is it lacking? It's lacking some DNA. So DNA is an important feature, right? That's an important part of things that are
But isn't
alive.
the ability to burn a part of your DNA? Like the ability for like, yeah, like combustion.
The ability to
But fire,
combust.
you can't take like a sample of fire and be like, oh, this is like it's blue.
This is good.
Right.
Well, because I mean, like, fire's not dictated by like any one substance. I mean, you can burn
That's
carbon, you
true.
can burn oxygen's a fuel for it, hydrogen.
Can you burn sugar?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you burn sugar?
Yeah,
But what's the difference from burning sugar the way that I just showed you and the way you burn sugar?
we do it safer.
You harness it, you use enzymes to break that down, right? You take that energy and you strategically move it
Take a
around.
low choice.
That's different. We sort of answered this, right?
Yeah.
In a blurry, sort of backwards way, answered why. And that's a tough question that I'm asking now. You guys remember this? So when I said I wanted to go back to some stuff that was happening in September that we talked about, it's relative. And we were talking about relationships between species, right? And I said, well, hey, who's more closely related and what things would you look for? How can we determine relatedness? All that stuff, right? So I gave these sort of points. And then the next slide, I just started showing you images, like this image right here. And this image right here. And then you remember what this last one was down here?
A whale.
Fish, right? Whales coming up. Looking at these right here, when we were considering this, what were we initially looking at? Do you remember sort of, I mean, the answer's obvious. You guys got the answer right. Who's more closely related? Well, the two types of bears are, right? But what were we looking at originally? Homologous structures. That's what we were looking at originally. These two share quite a bit, as opposed to that one, right? So then I wanted to show you guys a different set of images. Not that. Here it is. And the fish. Can you remember what this thing down here was?
Please tell me it's a whale.
Nope.
Oh, shoot.
It's a bacterium, right? So now if I'm asking you who's more closely related, who are you saying is more closely related? The fish and the bear. Well, what are some things that the fish and the bear are sharing with one another?
Double membrane.
Eyes.
Double membranes.
Eukaryote.
It's a eukaryote. It's got a spine, right? It's got some very similar things. So the question then is, on that last slide, you said that the fish really wasn't that related to the bear when you're looking at another bear. But if I go back far enough and I'm comparing in the right way, are these two things actually related with one another?
Yeah.
They are, more closely than this thing is, right? But if you go back even farther, you go back far enough in terms of who's related to who, could you say that all three of these things are related to one another? You could, right? And how do we know that those things are related to one another? They have a common ancestor, right? Absolutely. If you trace it back far enough, if we're able to do that. So then I showed you these. And we got into that strategy of, well, maybe structures aren't necessarily the best thing to look at. Maybe it's more something else. Maybe we can get a little bit closer idea of how closely things are related if we look at something different. Well, what was that something different that we ended up looking at and said, well, homologous structures are great, but let's look at something different. DNA. DNA, right? That was sort of our key of like how closely things are related to one another. And then this last picture, I said, well, who's more closely related between all these? Yeah. So Mr. Martin, or these two together, or who's actually more closely related? And then we looked at the percentages. And I don't know if you remember what the percent is. It's the percent relatedness between that and that. It's really, really high. And there's not much of a difference. That number is 99%. 99% of the genetic code that we're saying, well, DNA is probably the most reliable thing to tell us relatedness between things. 99, and I think it is 99.3 actually, is the exact same genetic code in a human compared to a chimp. And we're in biology and we're saying, well, if we're just studying things that make things alive, and a huge part of that is genetic code, and 99.3% is the same, would you guys say there's a big difference between yourselves and the chimps that are at the zoo right now?
No.
Yeah.
If you say no, I want to know why though. It's still, go ahead,
It's still
Jess.
a ton of genes.
Okay.
Like that, whatever, 0.7% is still like,
A lot.
hundreds of thousands of genes.
It's still tons and tons of genes,
Yeah.
right? Absolutely. I wonder what those genes do though.
Well, that they walk on all fours.
Okay, so let's talk about some differences between us and chimps. We talk about some differences.
They have hair all over.
Yeah, they have tons of hair. Some humans have lots of hair.
Well, they
Yeah.
have like different like facial structures, yeah.
Different facial
Well, isn't
structures.
that because their environments that they live in
Yeah.
versus what we lived in, like they had to.
Their environment's different.
They
Sure.
don't communicate verbally.
Are you positive they don't communicate?
Well, like, they don't talk, like, they don't have conversations, like how we're.
They're done.
I thought there was like a study or something that's like.
So Tyler disagrees. Go ahead, Tyler.
I thought there was like a study saying like, because there's a lot of things that communicate verbally or like communicate with each other that we don't really know. Like
Well, they don't have
there's like an
to-
elephant dictionary of like elephant like communication.
And chimps can learn sign language, so
Yeah.
they have the capable like ability to learn sign language.
Okay.
That's not even just chimps, like there's this.
There's a
girl
lot of
that's
animals
taught
that
sign
do
language.
that.
Yeah, so they do have the ability to communicate, but do they develop their own language? Well, then can I say that 0.7% then is the language gene?
There's no language.
Well, you could say like
It's the organism
capacity like
Intelligence.
Capacity?
like brain capacity to like, because they can do like.
Okay, so language is different, but now I'm also hearing something with brain physiology. Could that be a difference?
But they know, like if you go to the zoo, like there will be like gorillas that like walk up to the glass and like pose for pictures. I mean, they know what's going on.
Yeah,
they
but
just don't have a way to
their
express it.
capacity to like store information and stuff isn't as great as
Great as
ours.
ours.
When we
Yeah.
say we know what's going on, what are you talking about? Some things are conscious? Like we have consciousness?
Well, I think since like they've been held in the zoo, like they know, they've kind of figured it out that like when they see flashes, that people are like doing something because of them.
So an ability to learn
Yeah.
what's going on around. They can do that. And we can do that. Right? So the question that I want to get at, that I want to ask you, that I want to think about, oops, skip that, 50% same as a banana. Forgot that I had that up there. Is this question then? There's the big question. I want to know what makes us human. There's a large difference, and I think we all know this, just through simple observation, between ourselves and what's going on with chimpanzees. But the question I want to ask you guys, go ahead. The question that I want to ask you guys is, well, what is that? What literally is the thing that makes us human?
Well, we're kind of sapient. Well, no, because there's like a lot of like, I remember from like freshman biology, there's like a lot of like homos, aren't there? And, like, you know what I
In the genus Homo, yes, there's lots.
Yes, yeah, it's
Absolutely.
over, like our Okay, I'm just
Go ahead, Jordan.
I was gonna say that I think it comes down to like the intelligence really, because I know chimpanzees are smart, but they aren't like as intelligent as humans, and I would say like most people would probably agree that they aren't as intelligent as us.
Okay, maybe it's something to do with intelligence, but then I'm always going to prod a question further and say, well, why? Right?
We're
Like,
intelligent in a different way.
okay, so we are saying it's
We're
genes then.
smarter than them.
Yeah, it has to.
We have a mental capacity that's greater, but they're smarter in ways that like they can function in ways that we
So then
can't.
is it a societal difference?
Well, I think like.
Like if I plopped you down and a family of chimpanzees and I said, figure that out. Who's smarter than who at that point?
The group, like that's why I'm saying, like if you go into like a jungle,
Okay,
like they're smarter in their own little.
sure.
Well, but
Jackson,
they're
go ahead.
animals, so they're
It's almost like
adapted.
they have the same amount of brain capacity, but we've had more time to worry about brain capacity. Like, we figured out how to survive in the wild, and then we didn't have to worry about surviving necessarily. Like now, we don't really worry about surviving. We put on a coat or something for the cold.
Most of us don't worry about surviving.
Yeah.
Most
But
of us.
unlike chimpanzees, who still have to, survive in the wild.
Right, yeah.
I think it's kind of like, the thing that makes us different is that we have the ability to come up with new ideas. I mean, like you see a lot of things where like, an orangutan who was in a zoo learned to use a spear and started spear fishing. But, and like when it was reintroduced in the wild. But like, he didn't learn that on his own, or they didn't come up with like, oh, let's use tools. It all has to be learned stuff, they have to be taught language,
Okay.
stuff like that.
Sally, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I don't know if I think I agree with like most of it, what everybody else is saying, but then it just kind of comes back to, I don't know if we would ever be able to like test this, but just like as humans, like our morals and like things that make us different are kind of, I don't know if it comes down to like our communication level, like we can communicate our feelings better than they can, but just that whole like mind versus your actual like brain. Like a lot of times scientists say like your brain is different than your mind. Like your thoughts are different than like you actually what's going on in your head because they can't describe